Hi, everyone, and welcome to our June episode of our Wildlife Wednesday monthly roundup with Jackson Hole Eco Tour Adventures. I'm your host, Tenley Thompson, and our usual co-host, Tyler Greenlee, isn't able to make it this week, but he does send his best, and he did want to pass along our first video of the episode, which is a grizzly bear episode, including, of course, what you guys are hoping for, which is an update on 399. So let's go ahead and get started.
The months of May and June are the best times to see bears in Grand Teton and Yellowstone. Bears are emerging to forage on spring vegetation with new cubs, and large males are more visible, traveling long distances to find mates. My name is Tyler Greenlee, and I am here to give everyone an update on some of our famous bears we see out on tour. Of course, we have to start with everyone's favorite mother, Grizzly Bear 399. This spring, she surprised everyone by coming out of hibernation with a very large cub. At 27 years old this spring, she broke the record for oldest known female grizzly in the greater Yellowstone ecosystem to come out with a new cub. Meanwhile, 399's daughter, Grizzly Bear 610, has been turning heads along the roadways in Grand Teton with her 3 yearling cubs. She emerged this spring looking thinner than usual, sparking concern. However, after feeding on fresh spring vegetation and hunting elk calves, she is looking much better. One bear that we haven't featured a whole lot on our program, but we have been seeing quite frequently this spring, is Grizzly Bear 1063. She is a young female who has yet to produce a litter of cubs. However, this is not unusual, as most females produce their first litter around 5 to 6 years of age. And with any luck, next year she will emerge with her first litter. While out on tour, we don't just see famous bears, but many other grizzlies. And one of these bears that we saw on tour recently was this young subadult grizzly who was out on its own for the first time. Female bears evict their youngsters on their third summer, when they are around 2 years of age. This can be a difficult time for young bears as they learn to navigate the world without their mothers. Thanks everyone for tuning in. My name is Tyler Greenlee, and I look forward to seeing you all next month.
Thanks, Tyler, for that great update. For those of you guys just joining us, pretty exciting. Grizzly Bear 399, of course, has that one single cub that she's been hanging out with, and her daughter 610 still has those triplets who are now entering into their second year. So lots of bear activity going on in Grand Teton and Yellowstone this month, which is pretty typical for this time of year. But boy, there's a whole lot more going on than baby bears. So let's check in with a video that we shot last year with Sarah, talking about some of the great wildlife baby animals that we see in June every year.
Hello, wildlife watchers. This is Sarah Ernst coming to you from a patch of mule's ear wildflowers, a native wildflower of these parts. When I lead a trip, often people will ask, well, what's your favorite time of year for wildlife watching? And my answer is all year round, because every time of year there is something amazing happening out there, from the wolves of the winter, bears in early spring, the elk bugling in the fall. In June, definitely the highlight for me is the baby wildlife. We can see everything from 30-pound bison babies to the tiniest little baby weasels scurrying across the landscape. We're going to talk a little bit about the wildlife that we've been seeing across Jackson Hole and Yellowstone over the last month, and show you some of our favorite scenes that we've had over the month. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the strategy each animal has when it comes to bringing your baby out into a dangerous wild world. The first hoofed animal, or ungulate, that we see giving birth in the greater Yellowstone ecosystem is the American bison. Much earlier than the rest of the hoofed animals, we see our first bison calves on the ground sometimes as late as the last week of March or so, and then through April and May and into June. About 80% of the Yellowstone bison have May birthdays. We call them red dogs for their somewhat canine-looking appearance and playful behavior. At around 2.5 months old, they start shedding their orange fur, and around 4 months old, they're solid brown. With both bison and moose calves, they will begin to travel alongside their mother within a few hours of being born. In the case of bison, they will rejoin the herd. In the case of moose, they will travel by their loner mother's side for the rest of the year and sometimes into the next year as well. Moose are one of the only big animals we see around here that will have twins on occasion. In Jackson Hole, that's about 1 out of every 20 moose will have twins. And imagine being pregnant with a moose calf with those long legs would be unpleasant enough during your last trimester with all that kicking. But being pregnant with twins and 8 little legs kicking out in different directions must be a lot for that moose mother to go through. While bison and moose are both large and aggressive enough to defend their young against predators, the smaller ungulates will prefer to hide their young the first week or two after giving birth, only coming back to nurse them a few times per day. Elk calves have a high predation rate. About 2 out of every 3 elk calves that are born are preyed upon by predators within the first year, including grizzly bears like 399, wolves, mountain lions, and even golden eagles. To help protect their young against predators, it's safest for the females to hide them until they're large and fast enough to travel with the herd. The elk calves have very little scent, and that does not travel very far as they tend to lay very low amongst the grass or sagebrush or willows. And they also have white spots that help camouflage them against the dappled background. Our smaller 2 members of the deer family, mule deer and white-tailed deer, will follow a similar strategy to the elk, having young with spots to help for camouflage and very little odor, and hiding them the first week or 2 after they're born. Many of us will sometimes encounter these fawns in our neighborhoods, as deer are pretty successful at integrating themselves with human society today. It's very important to leave fawns alone when you find them, even if it looks like they're abandoned. The female will usually not approach if you're nearby, and moving them will decrease the chance that the mother and fawn will be able to reunite. Pronghorn fawns are my very favorite to watch. Within a few days of being born, a pronghorn fawn can already outrun a human, so when they get a case of azoomies, they can really tear it up. Pronghorn does' uteruses are bicornate, kind of meaning heart-shaped, and in a human female that can lead to reproductive problems. But in a pronghorn, it helps keep them balanced, having 1 baby in each corner, and because, like elk, they also have a fairly high predation rate on their young, it gives them a chance to have an heir and a spare, another one to carry on the genes in case one gets taken out by predators. Mountain goat kids are about the same size as pronghorn fawns when they come out, but unlike pronghorn fawns, they're able to leap around the cliffs that they're born on just a few hours of being born and stay by their mother's side, similar to the bison and the moose. Also, like bison and moose, the females are very aggressive in defending their young because they typically don't encounter many predators on the high cliffs that we see them on their whole lives. One of the only predators on mountain lion kids are eagles, which will occasionally knock a kid off of the cliffs where they're able to then go fly down and feed on it. All of these hoofed animals are born from mid to late spring, partly to take advantage of the abundance of forage at that time of year. The new grass is coming out, the new leaves coming out on the trees, but also to overwhelm the predators with availability. If all the young were staggered out over the course of the summer, the predators would be able to pick them off one by one. But if all the hoofed animals give birth at the same time, the predators can only eat so many when they're abundant. For our canine predators, they give birth a little earlier than the hoofed animals, usually around April into May for foxes, but typically before we see the green up that we get later on in the season. In the case of wolves, that's to take advantage of the weakened condition of our ungulates at the end of the winter and the beginning of the spring, and that transitions into the availability of young later in spring and into early summer. In the case of foxes, that's to take advantage of all of the rodent availability that time of year. Coyotes, being prey-wise in between foxes and wolves, take advantage of both resources. All 3 of our wild canine species will give birth in a den and raise their pups there the first few months of their life. The den can be dug out of the earth or in other protected places such as boulder fields. We've even seen them den under buildings in Grand Teton National Park. The den helps protect them from other predators as well as environmental factors like weather. And as the pups grow bigger, their eyes open, their fur comes out, and they begin to travel further and further away from their den in exploration. Wolves will eventually move their young to a rendezvous site at the end of summer, beginning of fall, when they're able to travel. Contrary to popular belief, most canines do not spend the night in dens. We see wolves lying around a den site while the pups are inside guarding it, but prefer to sleep out in the open themselves. One of the biggest threats to wolf pups are other wolves, so by laying outside the den when they sleep, they can keep an eye out for danger. Meanwhile, way back in midwinter when the wild canines are breeding, the bears, both the grizzly bears and the black bears, are already giving birth deep within their dens underneath the snow. The young are just a pound or so when they're born, without fur, and their eyes and ears are sealed shut. They will nurse on the females for 2 months in the den before they come out in the springtime. Black bear cubs will travel with their mother for the next year, nursing and also being taught how to find food across the ecosystem. This fall, they'll go into the den with her and hibernate, nursing, but also taking advantage of her body heat. They're a little too small to survive the winter on their own most times. As yearlings, the female will wean them and chase them away so that she can mate again. Black bear cubs are pretty small when they leave their mother, and when we encounter them this time of year, I'll often hear people say that their mother must be around. But it's not uncommon for us to find these small black bears just making a go of it by themselves. Still, though, we want to be respectful of the 100-yard distance from young black bear cubs, even though mother might not be around. Grizzly cubs will stay with their mother much longer, usually 2.5 years, sometimes 3.5 years. The average grizzly only gives birth every 3 years, so they have a much slower reproductive system than most of the other mammals across the ecosystem. Despite all those years of mother teaching them how to find food, it's often these young grizzly bears that get into trouble with people living in neighborhoods or agricultural areas around the greater Yellowstone ecosystem. So if you live around this area and there's a potential of a grizzly coming into your neighborhood, it's very important to keep tempting items like bird seed, dog food, or trash well out of reach of a young, curious grizzly bear.
All right, what an awesome update from Sarah. And thanks to all the guys who helped contribute video for that particular awesome look at all the amazing things that are going on in Grand Teton and Yellowstone every spring. So guys, we had 3 videos planned for you tonight. The last one was a wonderful one from Laura talking about spawning cutthroat trout. We're gonna have to wait until next month. We had some technical difficulties with that one just before the broadcast, but I promise you that'll be super, super fun and you'll get a chance to see it soon. But it's just about time for my favorite part of the broadcast, which is the Ask a Naturalist live. So if you've got a question for me about Grand Teton, Yellowstone, you're planning on touring the park and visiting, definitely let me know and ask me your questions about the area and what we've been seeing. We take questions from 5-year-olds and 85-year-olds. There's no right or wrong answer. And I can't promise I know the answer to everything, but I'll certainly do my best. In the meantime, it's time for our trivia question for your chance to win. So if you'd like a chance to win a gift card to our EcoTour Adventures store, which hopefully our moderator Kelsey will put up in just a minute here, all you have to do is you have to answer our trivia question correctly in the comment section for the original video that this is broadcast from. So if this has been shared to a page of a friend or a group about Yellowstone or Grand Teton, you have to go back to the original EcoTour Adventures live page and this broadcast in order to answer correctly for your chance to win. And all you have to do is just tell us in the comment section, just comment in the comment section, just like you would if you have a question for me, what you think the right answer is. Okay, so this month's trivia question is sponsored by our brand new EcoTour Adventures hats, guys. These are super duper fun. We've got them over on the web store. Kelsey will give us a quick link, but they're definitely worth checking out. We're pretty excited about these. Had them custom printed for us. So if you're looking for a new lid for summer. We also have kids hats too. This is one of my favorites. I've been putting it on my daughter. So definitely check that out. Lots of great stuff in the web store. Lots of books about the Greater Yellowstone ecosystem, prints, local art, stuff made by guides, all sorts of great stuff. And as always, if you enjoy our program, you can always send a donation to the ETA guides that are making these videos for you. This broadcast will always, of course, be free. We just enjoy showing you all the cool things we're seeing out there and nerding out with you all, particularly in that Ask a Naturalist section. But yeah, if that's of interest, people have asked us in the past, so we always put that up there. In the meantime, all right, let's first and foremost go to last month's trivia question, which has already been answered. Has already been awarded the correct answer. But if you think you know the answer, let me know in the comment section, and we'll talk a little bit about it. So we had to skip over, of course, May for training. Look at that elk losing his antlers. But the question was, who collects shed antlers on the National Elk Refuge? A, Grand Teton Park Rangers, B, the National Forest Service, C, the Boy Scouts, or D, the public? Watch this. He loses his antler. Whoa, there he goes. All right, if you've got any questions, any answers to this question, go ahead and let us know in the comment section. I see a couple coming in. Who collects the antlers on the National Elk Refuge? So this is done every single year. A lot of people ask, why do the antlers get picked up on the National Elk Refuge? And we'll get into that in just a second here when we get to the answer, but I'm giving you guys just a couple more seconds to give me an answer. All right. If you were not aware, the answer is C. The local Boy Scouts pick up the antlers on the National Elk Refuge since 1955. So antlers, of course, are bony projections from the head that branch or prong and are shed. Every year they fall off the elk. It doesn't hurt the elk at all. You can see that great video of that elk shedding his antler this year that Tyler took. Horns, by the way, something like a bison would have, or a bighorn sheep, are bony projections from the head that don't branch or prong. That's one of the ways you can tell them apart. And they don't shed. They don't fall off every year. But antlers like deer and elk and moose, they do fall off. Starting in 1955, they do supplementally feed wildlife on the National Elk Refuge alfalfa pellets. They started using modern machinery to do that versus horse-drawn sleighs, and the tires of the vehicles were running over these antlers and it was popping the tires. So they decided they wanted to pick up the antlers on the Elk Refuge, but they didn't have any money or personnel to accomplish that. They needed a bunch of free labor, and they looked around the town of Jackson. They said, where can we get a bunch of free labor back in the 1950s? And they said, I know, we'll ask the Boy Scouts to do it as a service project. And the Boy Scouts have been picking up the antlers ever since. However, antlers have become really, really valuable since that started happening. So initially, the Boy Scouts picked up those antlers on the Elk Refuge, and they just kind of piled them up in a pile. Eventually somebody was like, we should do something cool with that. And the antler arches on the square in Jackson were created from those initially picked up antlers. For those of you guys who've been to Jackson in the last 10 years, we have recently replaced those old antler arches because antler does decay. It is bone. And they had become very weathered and were kind of falling apart. And so a big donation project was put in place, and almost $500,000 in antlers were donated to form the new antler arches on the square. But if you still want to see an example of the old antler arches, they're still around town. The Rustic Inn, as you're headed into Grand Teton National Park, actually bought one of the old antler arches at auction. So if you're ever in the town of Jackson, you can see one of the originals there. But every year over the Memorial Day weekend, we have an event called Old West Days here in Jackson, and it is the world's largest antler auction, and the Boy Scouts do hold an auction to auction off all of the antlers that they collect each year on the Elk Refuge. Now, the elk have left the refuge by the time the Boy Scouts are going out there and picking all these up. And I was really annoyed when I was a little kid because the Girl Scouts were not invited, and that was really, really lame. But things have changed. I'm glad to tell you that in the modern world, the Boy Scouts and the Girl Scouts and the Explorer Scouts, which is a branch of the Boy Scouts that allows girls, actually are able to go out there and pick up those antlers. So it's both boys and girls that are out there picking it up. They're going into areas that are closed to public entry for most of the year, if not all of the year. And so it's a pretty cool thing as a kid to be able to go where your parents are never going to be able to step, right? They're picking up these antlers, they're sorting them, and then they are auctioning them off on the town square over Memorial Day weekend. It's the largest sale of antler in the world, and people come from all over the world to buy this antler. There's lots of things. People always ask me, what do people do with antlers? Why are we auctioning them off? And that's a really, really good question. People, of course, make furniture and jewelry, things like chandeliers and knife handles and what have you with it. But it's also a potent herbal cure in many Asian countries and used for a variety of resources. And Asian market middlemen will come and buy it by the ton at the antler auction. And then in the last decade, it's become increasingly popular to be used as dog chews. If you go to your local Petco or farmer's market, you'll sometimes see people selling antler as a dog chew. Now, you know, the wildlife biologist in me is glad to see a renewable resource get some use. However, the veterinary technician in me would like to tell everybody, please don't buy antlers for your dogs. It's really hard on their teeth. It's a really easy way to crack their teeth. And then you have expensive dental surgery. So yes, dogs love to chew antlers. It's not really that good for them. So maybe not a good use of it, but the vast majority of antlers sold now goes towards dog chews because they are popular throughout the country and throughout the world for dogs to eat. Interesting thing about this year's antler auction, I had a lot of fun wandering around shopping and looking at all the cool antlers that have been collected by the Boy Scouts. The price was much, much lower this year than the average. So last year, the average price per pound on antlers was $27 per pound. Keep in mind, a large pair of bull elk antlers, a good trophy pair, is about a 40-pound pair of antlers. Imagine that going for $27 a pound, and you can imagine how much money some of these antlers are really worth. This year, we had a very, very hard winter, and so there were actually quite a few bit more elk on the refuge, which means there were more antlers available. There was a larger supply, and therefore the price did drop down to $22 a pound. So we had 9,696 pounds of antlers collected on the National Elk Refuge this year. That's about 2,348 pounds more than were collected on the refuge last year with a much more mild winter. So the harder the winter, the more the elk come into the lowlands of the valley, the more elk shed their antlers. And interestingly enough, the lower the overall average price. Now, of course, a big trophy pair is going to go for way more than $27 a pound. But the Boy Scouts will sometimes auction off these lots that are over a ton in size. So if you ever get a chance to come out here on Memorial Day weekend and check all of this stuff out, antler collecting, what's called shed hunting, in Wyoming is a big trade. I have some friends who do that and nothing else, and they make enough money, they don't have to work the rest of the year. So if you want to live that ski bum lifestyle, you can move out here, get really good at collecting antlers in the wilderness. Now, there are people who, of course, say, well, why are we picking up all these antlers? And the answer is because they're valuable. The Boy Scouts are the only ones allowed to collect them on the elk refuge. 80% of the proceeds of the antler auction go back to elk habitat improvement on the elk refuge. So the elk are shedding their antlers, the antlers are being auctioned, and then that money is going back to the elk, which is a really good thing. However, 20% of it goes to the Boy Scouts, and a lot of that is just used to hold the auction. It's expensive to bring in the auctioneers and do all the sorting and warehousing and everything else. And the rest of it goes to the Boy Scouts. We have the wealthiest Boy Scouts in the United States. They get to do all sorts of cool things like go to Europe and stuff. So pretty cool to be a Boy Scout in Jackson Hole, which is why I was so jealous as a girl when I was a little kid. But the girls get to be involved now too, which I'm glad to hear. Yeah, if you ever get the chance to come out here and see all this, it's definitely worth it. In Grand Teton National Park and National Park System segments, we do leave antlers where we find them. It is illegal to remove antlers from national parks. You definitely want to leave them alone and just leave them where you found them. That's because it's a really important source of calcium in the environment. Things like rodents, in particular, need to get their calcium from chewing on antlers. And so if it weren't for technical reasons that we've got to remove them from the refuge, we wouldn't. But to be perfectly honest with you, modern day, the reason they have to pull the antlers off the refuge is antlers are so valuable that if they leave them out there, people will trespass to go and pick them up regardless of whether it's legal or not, and that will spook the elk. That'll drop their body weights and put them at risk in the winter. So far better to remove that temptation out there on the elk refuge. Any other questions about the antler auction, do let me know, but we have to get to this month's trivia question because I've talked way too long about one of my favorite subjects. Love that antler auction. If you think you know the answer, go ahead and comment in the comment section for your chance to win, and we'll go from there. Okay, so this month's trivia question is, why do black bears peel bark from trees? A, to eat insects and other arthropods under the bark. B, to clean their fur. And C, to eat the inner bark layer. So A, B, C, let me know. What on earth is this bear doing? I think it's so funny. You can see he's a great example of this particular activity. And there was a great research paper that recently came out talking about the damage that black bears can do to trees. That goes into some detail about what their reasoning for this is. Let us know what you think in the comments section. We will pick a random person who answered correctly to win, and we'll go ahead and we'll go into why that bear's doing that and what the correct answer is in next month's Wildlife Wednesday Roundup for July, where we've got some great videos lined up, including that spawning cutthroat trout. Okay, super fun. Enough for trivia. Now, of course, it's time for my favorite part, which is the Ask a Naturalist section. I am here to answer any of your questions live. Just go ahead and type them in the comment section of the original broadcast so that I can see it, because I can't see it if it's been shared to other pages and you're asking there. And I will do my best to answer your questions. I have my iPad here, so if you see me looking down, it's because I'm kind of looking at the questions as you ask them, and we'll kind of go in the order of which they've been received. Ooh, lots of correct answers, you guys. You guys are too smart. We thought Tyler, our trivia master, who couldn't be here tonight, thought that was actually like really kind of a hard one. He sent it to me earlier this week. He said, "Do you think this is too hard?" And I said, "Gosh, I had to think a little bit before I even knew the answer to that." So I don't know. You guys are smarter than the average bear. Actually, bears are really smart. So I don't know. Maybe you're smarter than the average bear, because most of you are getting that question right. Let's see here. All right. Let's see here. Cool. Angela writes, "We're taking a tour on Saturday morning with you. Can't wait." Angela, I'm so excited you're coming out with us. Boy, you're here at the right time of year. Just epic sightings every single day. I spend a lot more time in the office than I used to these days, and I'm very jealous of some of these guys out in the field. It's incredible what they're seeing. So that's pretty amazing. Pretty great. Dawn asks, any lion sightings lately in either park? Dawn, that is a really good question. This is an interesting time of year for mountain lions. Mountain lions can give birth to kittens technically any time of year, but a lot of them will do it in the spring. And so this is a time when mountain lion sightings can be both easier and harder depending on what's going on. Male mountain lions, as the area gets more populated, are actually less likely to be seen and more in the backcountry. There's a brief period in April where the snow kind of melts and all of that roadkill on the side of the road gets unburied, and you'll sometimes see mountain lions feasting on that. Or, one of my favorite places to look for mountain lions is at the base of avalanches in the spring. Where, an avalanche might have wiped out a bunch of mule deer in the wintertime way up in the mountains, and then they got buried in the snow. But as the snow has melted, it's kind of kept that carcass fresh. And then you'll sometimes see mountain lions feeding then. Now that the snow's melted, it actually gets really hard to see mountain lions for a little bit. Mothers are still having to go out and forage and feed their kittens. And so there is some possibilities there, but they're really, really quiet and elusive. And those males are a little harder to see. So I don't have anything in the last, let's say, month to tell you about. But that's not atypical for this time of year. Not really a time of year I'm going to see as many mountain lions. We did have some mountain lion tracks in the last month that we've seen, but no actual sightings of mountain lions. So great question there. Hopefully a little bit later in the summer and then definitely in the fall we'll have some success. But they're very, very, very elusive animals, so it can be a little tough. Let's see here. Phyllis, I think I answered this, but just in case I didn't, what's the average price of the antlers? This year, the average price was $22.03 a pound, but that's because there were a lot more antlers available. Usually I tell guests on tour the average price is somewhere around $25 a pound. Last year, the average price was $27.41 a pound. Remember that an exceptional pair of antlers is going to go for far more than that, but an average pair of antlers might go for that. That's just elk antlers. All sorts of different things are available to purchase at the antler auction. So the Boy Scouts are picking up the elk antlers and auctioning those off. But at the same time, anybody can lay a blanket out on the town square and just set out some antlers that they have found out in the woods and sell them. And antler buyers are coming from all over the world. And so people are selling moose antlers, deer antlers, antlers attached to skulls that they found out in the woods and they've hiked out with. Obviously, there are rules about that. If you find a skull with antlers attached and you'd like to keep it, you certainly can. It is yours to take. But you do have to inform Wyoming Game and Fish, and they have to put a metal tag on it that just proves that you didn't poach that animal or take it illegally later on. Really, really easy to do, but something to remember so that when it's hanging in your home years later, you don't get caught for poaching. But yeah, average price this year, $22.53. I can't remember the last year that the price was so low, but I also can't remember the last time we had such a severe winter on the valley floor. I'm about 40 years old. I'm exactly 40 years old. And the last time I remember a winter being quite that harsh was in maybe my late 20s. So it's been a long time. We've certainly had deeper winters in terms of skiing up on the hillsides, but none quite so hard on the wildlife on the valley floor. It's estimated we lost up to 80% of our pronghorn population this winter because of the severity, and mule deer populations also really suffered a lot. So yeah, it's been a tough winter. We're happy to have a good spring and lots of baby animals out there for sure. So great question. Caitlin asks, on average, how much does each antler weigh? They look big on screen. They have to be so huge in person. They are so huge in person. And as you guys know on the show, we've actually brought antlers for you guys to see. And in fact, on our tours, we always bring antlers for people to play with and hold. Different size animals are going to have different antlers. So that's going to make my question more nuanced. I'm assuming let's just start with a Wyoming elk and then we'll go outwards from there because that's probably what you meant by the question. A young bull will have what's called a spike, just a straight spike, coming out of their head. And that spike is usually no more than about 12 inches in length, about a foot. And then from there, they'll get a split. And then from there, they'll start to develop more and more off that main beam. A 6x6, 6 points by 6 points, is a normal or typical elk. But you can have what's called a non-typical elk who can have many, many, many more points than that. And there are two ways that we classify antlers, and we look at antlers and we value antlers. One is typical, one is non-typical. And there is a world record for a typical antler, and there's a world record for a non-typical antler. Kelsey, if you don't mind, in the comment section, just go to the Boone and Crockett website and go to the world records and just link to the world record elk typical and the world record elk non-typical, and that'll help you out. But for those of you guys who've never seen an elk in person with a large antler rack, not even a trophy size would be bigger than you can see my arms across. A good way to measure, I was always taught, a trophy pair of antlers is if an elk leans their head back to scratch their back and the back of the antlers goes over the back of their butt. They're probably what's called a 400-point class bull, which would be a record holder and maybe one of the top 100 elk of that year. Anything where they can kind of scratch at their rear end is probably a 200 to 300 class bull, if that's helpful. But 400 class bull is going to have probably 6 feet of antler, to give you an idea. So they can be really, really big. Moose antlers, of course, can be even bigger. But remember, there's lots of animals out there in the world that have antlers, right? So Sitka deer for instance, have antlers, or white-tailed deer are going to have much smaller antlers. A big trophy whitetail is going to be about yay big. A smaller set. Mule deer are going to be a little bit bigger. And then moose, of course, and particularly Alaskan moose, can have really, really big, huge, wide paddled antlers that can weigh way in excess of 40 pounds. So depends on which animal we're talking about. Kind of neat piece of trivia. The foundational understanding of what makes an antler versus a horn is that antlers are shed every year, right? And horns are not. But one of the other really foundational aspects is every single animal in the world that has antlers, only the males have them. There's only one animal in the world that's an exception to that rule. Does anybody know what it is? Where both the males and the females have antlers. For instance, in elk, only the bulls or the males have antlers, and in deer, only the males or bucks have antlers. The one exception in the world is reindeer or caribou. Both the males and the females have antlers and shed them. Kind of fun fact when it comes to reindeer, the males actually shed their antlers earlier than the females do, usually in November. So that means in December, the only reindeer with antlers are girls. And every depiction I've ever seen of Santa's sleigh, the reindeer have antlers on, which means all of Santa's reindeer are women, which means Rudolph is a girl, if you're going to follow the science to its ridiculous conclusion, which is my favorite thing to do. So next time it's Christmas time, feel free to remind everybody that all of Santa's reindeer are girls. I just find great delight in that fact. Anyway, moving on. Let's see what we got here. Caitlin, you've got a great question. I bet the wolves love chewing on them. Oh my gosh, do they love chewing on them. They also would make great toys for the pups. And so when I'm out on some of our multi-day tours, I'll actually take folks out to an old wolf den site that hasn't been used in many, many years, that the wolves are no longer using and aren't making use of that area for denning. And we can go up there and you can kind of crawl around inside the den site and check it out and feel what it's like to be a wolf pup. The area in front of the den is just littered with bone pieces that have chew marks all over them where the pups have played with them. Coyote pups love to chew on bones as well. They love antlers. It's a great toy. It's really funny to watch these wolf pups try to pick up these antlers and maneuver them around because they're so much bigger than they are that they really struggle with it, which is the same reason that dogs love to chew on antlers. And some folks in town will actually train their dogs to find antlers. They'll get them addicted to antlers when they're young and make them love them. And then when they're out hiking in the national forest where it is legal to pick up antler sheds, the dogs will naturally go and seek out and find antlers. And if they can get them to give them back quickly enough, they can sell them for a profit. So there can be some value in the fact that canids really love to chew on antlers. So great question there. Let's see what else we got here. Libby asks, how's Orca? Has she meowed, you guys? I don't think I've heard her. Orca, guys, is my cat, and we're doing this in my home, and she sometimes likes to interrupt Wildlife Wednesday by meowing. She's looking great, you guys. She's getting up there in age, but she is providing tremendous entertainment to my 4-year-old daughter these days. She's been crawling up on her bed in the middle of the night and sleeping on her head, which my daughter doesn't quite know what to think of that. So the cat's doing great. The family's doing great. Thank you for asking. That's always fun. Caitlin asked, have there been any wolf pup sightings this spring? Yes, Caitlin, we've got lots of wolf pups, and we just got back from the northern range of Yellowstone, which is sort of the easiest place in the world to see them, 2-3 days ago, and we've got a great wolf pup update for you for next month's Wildlife Wednesday episode. But yes, there are wolf pups reported in most of our Grand Teton and Yellowstone packs this spring, including our newest Yellowstone pack, which has been making waves because of its name. These wolves are denning in an area near Shrimp Lake. And so wolf packs are named by the closest geographical object to where they den. So a great example is the Druid Peak pack is named after Druid Peak, right? Well, the Shrimp Lake pack is now called the Shrimp Pack of Wolves, which is my new favorite name for a wolf pack. I love it. The Shrimp Pack. They've got pups too. They are descendants of that Junction Butte pack, which is probably the most famous pack in the park, who has pups as well. So, lots of wolf pup sightings out there. You know, it is early, and we oftentimes will see some die off and loss of pups depending on distemper, other diseases, having to swim those really, really roaring rivers in the early spring. So it's early yet to know what kind of wolf crop we're going to get in terms of wolf population. But things are looking good up there. Great question. Kelsey did post those world record holder typical and non-typical elk, so you can see what the heck those look like. That can be kind of a fun website to maneuver around and look at all the world record holders for every animal on the planet. Keep in mind, if you are somebody who doesn't like looking at dead and taxidermied animals, that is not the website for you. But if you'd like to see some of these, that's where they're all registered and kept. So great question. Don says, found a very nice shed at that den. Don, I don't know if we're talking about the same den, but we probably are. And you're right. There is a very, very beautiful shed up there for sure. So that's really fun that you've been there too. That's great. Don asks, why do I call my cat Orca? She's black and white and she loves water. And if she had her way, she'd love killing things too. Which are all the characteristics of an orca. So I figure it's a pretty good name for her. Makes sense to me. She is an indoor only cat just because I want to protect our local songbird population. But if she had her way, she'd be an excellent songbird murderer among her other skills. And if she had her way, she'd probably bathe in her water bowl. So that's why she's called Orca. Great question. Let's see here. Melinda, you're opening up a can of worms with this one. Why are wolves so important to the ecosystem? That is a really, really, really good question. And I'm going to tell you why wolves are so important to the ecosystem. But I think it's incredibly important before we get into that to preface this by saying this is a controversial issue in the West. And my goal on these programs is not to give you my opinion on things unless you guys specifically ask. It's to give you the facts of the situation and let you generate your own opinion. But I will tell you that things are controversial, not because one side is right and the other side is wrong. It's probably because both sides have a valid point of view and the truth is probably somewhere in the middle. We don't have controversy in this country because people are just wholly right and wholly wrong, and things oftentimes are not just black and white, and predators in the West are complex, and wolves are no stranger to that. But yeah, so probably a bunch of you guys have seen a video that floats around on Facebook periodically called How Wolves Changed the Course of Rivers. And I'm going to annoy a bunch of you guys by telling you that that video is not terribly accurate. It's not wrong. It's just not terribly accurate. The essential ideas of that video are correct, but the truth is more nuanced than the video suggests. And the video basically suggests that wolves fundamentally change every aspect of the ecosystem for the better. Wolves definitely do have a strong impact on ecosystems. They do affect many, many, many animals, most of them in a very positive way. But I think early on in wolf reintroduction in Yellowstone, people were just so eager to prove that wolves were doing good things, that maybe we over-exaggerated their impact a little bit more than it needed to be. That said, let's sort of talk about, let's talk about the northern range of Yellowstone, which is the first place that wolves were reintroduced back in 1995 after being expatriated or made locally extinct in the continental United States. And we're talking about gray wolves now, mind you, not like, red wolves or Mexican wolves, right? Those are other species, or Arctic wolves. We're just talking about gray wolves at the moment. They were made extinct in the continental United States, and we reintroduced them in Yellowstone in 1995. If you went to Yellowstone in, let's say, 1994, and you went up to the Lamar Valley of Yellowstone, and you took a look at that valley, you'd notice a couple things that were very, very problematic. First of all, there were no mature adult trees for the most part on the valley floor. Most of those trees that were growing on the valley floor had been girdled by wildlife. They had been peeling the bark off of the trees to get at the cambium, the inner bark of the wood in the winter, as a good food source. And those trees were heavily, heavily damaged by an overabundance of animals making use of the valley floor. So elk, if you allow them to just stay put and don't do anything, will just kind of eat the ground like goats. If you'd like to see what this looks like, go to the National Elk Refuge, and it's a perfect example of what I'm talking about. And they'll just kind of mow the ground down until there is no vegetation left. And what that does is it's problematic for other species. It directly contributes to declines of things like moose, mule deer, pronghorn, other ungulate hoofed animals suffer greatly when there's an overabundance of elk. And the Northern Range elk herd has had a very complicated history. Periods of drought, increasing predation, floods, all sorts of things can really actively affect their populations. And so we have to be a little careful when we talk about the Northern Range herd, because one single variable is not what seems to affect them one way or another. But the short version is the elk were kind of eating the land to death. And they needed something not necessarily to reduce their population, but to move them around and force them to not just stay in one place and eat and eat and eat until there was no vegetation left. But when you strip the land of vegetation, particularly brushy vegetation, you get two issues. The first is you get a lot of erosion because there's nothing keeping things like riverbanks in place. And the second thing you get is animals who rely on woody, brushy vegetation aren't able to survive and live in those places. So some good examples of what I mean by that is the Lamar Valley didn't have any beaver per se. There really weren't very many. Because beaver require young trees to chew on, and they require bushy brush to be able to build their lodges and dams and to also eat. And because you didn't have beavers, you also didn't have flooded areas. Beavers will flood and create wetlands, and all of the wetland species that you would typically expect to see were also missing from the ecosystem because the beavers were missing. And because the wetland ecosystems were missing, and because the way the water was flowing didn't have these rapid areas with more still areas, we didn't see a lot of nesting fish populations. And so fish populations were also really low. And because fish populations were also really low, our river otter population wasn't doing very well in the valley either. And because there were no low brushy bushes and there wasn't any good nesting habitat, we didn't really see much in the way of songbirds in the ecosystem either. There were a couple species, but the diversity wasn't very high. And because the diversity wasn't very high, we didn't see a lot of raptors or birds of prey that rely on those songbirds to eat. There were a couple individual species that were doing okay, but things like bald eagle that require fish and things like peregrine falcons that require small songbirds to eat weren't thriving in that ecosystem. If you go and you start looking at it, you start to see what's called a trophic cascade, where one thing is missing and there's a cascading effect that occurs throughout the ecosystem as a result. Now, it is really, really easy to latch on this idea and say, cool, the wolves were missing and everything else was messed up. And you'll hear people say that. It's probably not quite that simple. Things were out of whack, yes. Would the ecosystem have survived in the long term without wolves? It probably wouldn't have survived in its most natural state, no. It wasn't thriving without them. But yes, absolutely, the ecosystem would have survived without them. There was an enormous overabundance of coyotes that was causing there to be almost no foxes present in the ecosystem. And that was also impacting the rodent populations, and the rodent populations are important for all sorts of things. We don't even need to start going into why rodents are important in an ecosystem because I'll take too long. But the short version is we bring in wolves. We don't even bring in very many wolves, just a couple packs in the beginning, but that's enough to make sure that elk move around. They can't just stay in one place anymore. They have to be alert. They have to move from place to place. They have to change where they're going, which allows grass and forbs and shrubs the opportunity to grow and survive and thrive in a way that wasn't available when there was nothing that was going after those same elk. Elk predation, particularly in the beginning, wasn't particularly high because there weren't very many wolves, but immediately we begin to see pretty dramatic changes in the next decade with other wildlife. Turns out that wolves are what we call a keystone species, the keystone of the arch, and then there's all these other animals that are reliant. You can't have an arch without that top piece, otherwise all the stones will fall down. In the same way, an ecosystem needs that keystone in order for it to thrive. So if you go into the Lamar Valley today, you're going to see an abundance of beaver and lots of river otters and birds of prey and songbirds and bushes and shrubs and all sorts of things that we're missing. You're also going to get an opportunity to see far more moose than you historically would have. You're going to see an abundance of a lot of things. But keep in mind that at the same time we were bringing wolves back, grizzly bear populations were also recovering. And so we don't want to just blame this single-handedly on one species. The return of grizzly bears to the ecosystem probably was having a similar effect, and that it was forcing elk to move around, which was sort of creating this trophic cascade effect on many animals too. So it's never quite as simple as you think it will be, but that's the shortest answer I can think to give you about why wolves are important to an ecosystem. There's lots and lots of great information out there. I highly recommend on the Yellowstone National Park Service page, there's some wonderful videos by the head wolf biologist, Doug Smith, who goes into this in enormous detail. And you can learn a lot more about what the reality of the benefit that wolves make is. I think people who love wolves want them to be sort of the saviors of the ecosystem. I like to joke on tour, they want them to poop rainbows. The truth is probably a little bit more nuanced than that. I think people who hate wolves want them to be, the devil's spawn that are constantly killing cattle and destroying human livelihoods. And no, the truth is far more nuanced than that. Can wolves kill cattle? Absolutely. Do wolves kill cattle? Yeah, they do. It doesn't happen very often. It's pretty darn rare. And we work really, really, really hard to remove wolves that are known cattle killers. Once they kind of get a taste for it, they tend to continue doing it. So it is possible to live with wilderness and wolves and grizzlies and other predators and coexist with these animals, but it does require work on both sides of how people feel. People who hate predators have to be willing to coexist with them, and people who love predators have to understand that there are good things and bad things about any animal, regardless of who they are. And animals that are causing an enormous amount of damage to human property are not going to be sustainable, which is to say, we can't pretend we live back in some prehistoric time when people aren't making their livelihoods on their land and have been for generations. We have to be realistic about where wilderness is versus wilderness is not. And when animals are causing a lot of hardship and damage to humans, we need to respect that can create some issues. And there's a way. There is a middle road. It is a hard one. It's much easier to feel passionately one way or another. But the truth, as usual, is in the middle for a lot of these things. So hopefully that gets onto, oh my gosh, such a debate. I haven't even looked at the comment section, but I'm sure there's a lot of pro and anti folks who would like to have a strong opinion with me on that one. But that should get you started on that. Let's see here, what else we've got. Oh, awesome. Thank you, Kelsey, for putting that great Doug Smith information. Like I said, my goal here is to not give you my opinion. It's to give you the facts and let you generate your own opinion. And sometimes these issues are put out in the public arena as really simple, so that's easy for people to understand. Climate change is a good example. Climate change is really complicated and complex. That doesn't mean that we don't see effects from it. We do, but it's more nuanced than I think most people realize. In the same way, predators in the West are really complicated and complex. And there's no question that Yellowstone is better off for being the only intact ecosystem in the lower 48. Everything that's supposed to be there now with the return of the wolf is there. We have all the species intact. But that comes with a cost, and that comes with consequences, and that comes with a balance. So great. That's awesome. Let's see here. Do we have any other ones? I think I got everybody's questions. Yeah, I think I got everything. If you've got a question because you're either watching this broadcast after it's gone out live, or I missed your question for some reason and I didn't see it, do put it in the comment section. We'll be looking all week. We'll get you guys some answers. But in the meantime, it has been a pleasure spending this Wednesday with you. We are always on the first Wednesday of each month at 5:30 p.m. Mountain Time. We'll be back next month with some great views of wolf pups, wolves, cutthroat trout. We've got all sorts of stuff in store for you. Always a bear update. But have an awesome June, everybody, and we'll see you next time. So long.